everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jimmy Yu. I teach Chinese Buddhism and religion in the Department of Religion here at FSU. This evening's lecture is part of a series of lectures celebrating the 50th anniversary of our Department of Religion, so it's auspicious. Last semester we had 4 wonderful speakers. Aside from tonight's speaker, we have 2 more coming up. So please check our website, February 4th and March 23rd. One on March 23rd, Lopez will give 2 lectures. This evening's talk is sponsored by the Shenyang Lecture Series, and I'm delighted, extremely happy to have with us Professor Stephen Kaiser, who's my PhD advisor. He is the D.T. Suzuki Professor in Buddhist Studies and Professor of Religion in the Department of Religion at Princeton. Professor Kaiser is arguably, of course from my biased view, one of the leading scholars beginning in the 80s who explored the deeper structures that often portray nebulous, the popular religion category through which the Buddhist tradition was understood and practiced on the ground, as opposed to prescriptive claims. Also, during the 80s, Buddhist studies witnessed the growing impact of social sciences, especially anthropology, cultural literary studies, and its impact on Buddhist studies as a field, transforming and shaping the field from a focus on philology, philosophy, doctrine, to social history, ritual studies, material cultural studies. To my mind, Kaiser represents a progenitor of this new wave, you may call new breed of Buddhist scholars, who drew from these rich methodological approaches. They're neither sinologists, with their focus on pure history, literature, philosophy, nor Buddhologists, focused on doctrine, theory, prescriptive, scriptural, canonical claims, but drew from a wide range of sources with an interdisciplinary and often thematic approach to study of Buddhism in China. Kaiser is also the leading scholar in manuscript culture in the field of Dunhuang studies. All of his books utilize both textual and art historical, material cultural sources from Dunhuang caves. And all of his books have won international and national awards, every one. Beginning with his first book, The Ghost Festival in Medieval China from 1988, received the American Council of Learned Society Prize for the best first book in the history of religion in 1999. His second book, The Scripture on the 10 Kings and the Making of Purgatory in Medieval Chinese Buddhism in 1994, received the Joseph A. Levinson Book Prize from the Association of Asian Studies for Pre-Modern China. His third book, Reinventing the Wheel, Painting of Rebirth in Medieval Buddhist Temples in 2006, was awarded the Stanislas Julien Prize by the Academy of Epigraphy and Literature from Institute of France, given in recognition of scholarship on the Asian humanities. And he's also the editor of a series of Columbia Readings in Buddhist Literature, published by Columbia University Press, such as the readings, the Lotus Sutra, Platform Sutra, and he is now working on several book manuscripts, one of which will be published in Chinese. The other 2 will be on liturgical text from the Dunhuang case. Those two will be English. Of course, he has published numerous articles and won many awards, NEH, ACLS, Zheng Jingguo Foundation. At Princeton, I saw him as the master of grant proposal writing. Henry Luce Foundation to all these big different institutions. And so it's really a pleasure to see him here. Simply very happy to see my old advisor here. Tonight's talk is entitled Curing with Karma, Healing Liturgies in Chinese Buddhism. Please join me in warmly welcome.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. If it's a pleasure to see your old advisor, it's your old advisor's pleasure to see his young advisee at his academic home where he is prospering and his home department is also prospering. I'm really happy to join the FSU department in its 50th year celebration. I have to confess, when I got off the plane yesterday, things felt very familiar. I got off the plane and a gust of warm, humid air hit me, and it was familiar because I grew up until the age of 13 very near here. If you go on I-10 due west, and you go 625 miles, you'll get to Beaumont, Texas, where I grew up. But another reason for the sense of familiarity, which I found already, I knew about it before I came, but I've been talking already with many of his colleagues, is that my home department, where I spent most of my academic career, I was trained, I did my PhD at Princeton University, and after teaching at other places, I went back to teach there some years ago and have remained there. Our departments are really we're related. There's a pretty close family resemblance. We have very similar arrangements of the subfields. We were of the same generations, 50s or 60s was our founding. And so in our orientation, we have many similarities. And the department here is a really strong and vital and growing and large department as the Asian departments grow. And it seems very successful in its undergraduate, its graduate programs, and its sponsorship of the top flight journals, and so on. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I congratulate the department on its 50th anniversary. Let me share with you some of the work that I'm doing. This is really work in progress. It's part of the one of the book projects that Jimmy mentioned, dealing with liturgy, healing liturgies. So it's not really a finished piece of writing yet. For the past few years, I've been studying about 125 short prayers for the healing of illness that survive among the Dunhuang manuscripts. The liturgies aim to heal illness, but they don't employ medical techniques. Instead, they resort to religious methods. The primary mechanism for healing is karma, the Buddhist idea that by making a donation and performing a ritual, the benefits of that donation can be dedicated to the cure of illness. At their most basic level, the liturgies raise the question of how one's deeds affect one's health. Hence, the working title for my book on the subject is Curing with Karma. The liturgies enact a transference of goodness from a donor to a sick person, turning good deeds into good health. In addition, the rites call upon deities and other agents, including enemies or adversaries, to assist in the cure. And so my philosophical questions will touch on karma and morality, the logic of Buddhist ritual, and concepts of healing and well-being in Chinese Buddhism. This is where the Dunhuang manuscripts come from. this cave right about here. These are the Mogao Caves, a complex of cave temples carved into soft cliffs at the western edge of what was then the medieval Chinese Empire, not far from the town of Dunhuang in Gansu province. On this map, I can't see the green dot. Dunhuang is the circle here. It's titled Dunhuang or Shazhou, and the square just below it, the yellow square just below that circle, is the Mogao Caves, about 15 miles away in the desert. Dunhuang was established as a Chinese military and administrative outpost as early as the 1st century of the Common Era. Over the centuries, it grew into a thriving international town, providing a mechanism for the Chinese government to monitor its Western neighbors and to regulate trade along the Silk Road. The red lines you see on this map designate trade routes over the short run that were used during the 8th and 9th century, when Dunhuang served as a gateway between China to the east and the various kingdoms of the period westward. Let's look at a map of polities for the same time period, roughly around 800 of the Common Era. In the year 800, Dunhuang was a crossroads for interchange between a shrunken Tang Empire in China, here to there, there, to the east, and in India, on the Indian subcontinent, a Pala dynasty and other Indian kingdoms to the south, occupying the center of this map, the Tibetan Empire, then called the Tufan Empire or the Tubwa Empire, militarily dominant empire, quite large, as you can see, slightly larger than the Chinese Empire in the second half of the Tang Dynasty. Various Uyghur and Turkish people empires to the north and to the west of China, to the west of the Asian continent, an Arab empire, and beyond that, a Europe that was shared loosely between Charlemagne and Rome. So that's the medieval situation. Let's look at the modern situation in Dunhuang and when the manuscripts there were discovered. Shortly after the year 1000, the entire contents of several Buddhist libraries in the Dunhuang area, not there at the caves, but libraries or monasteries throughout the region, were assembled together and sealed up in one shrine room at the caves. There, the manuscripts remained until the year 1900, when the young monk shown here, Wang Yuanlu, cut through a wall and discovered the fantastic deposit of manuscripts. It did not take long for the Europeans to get there as well. This is Paul Pelliot, first dispatched from his post in the École Française d'Extrême-Orient in Hanoi in the year 1900 to purchase books in China. After surviving the siege of the foreign legations in Beijing during the Boxer Rebellion in 1908, Pelliot was able to follow in the footsteps of Marcus Aurelius Stein, the Hungarian geographer working for the Archaeological Survey of India. First Stein, then Pelliot, then scholars from Russia and Japan came to Dunhuang and carried away cartloads of handwritten manuscripts in the first few decades of the 20th century. Numbering around 60,000 or so, some are individual books and complete, some are simply pieces and fragments. The cache of texts constitutes one of the most important archaeological discoveries in the history of Buddhism and one of the four great archaeological discoveries in China in the 20th century. Of these 60,000 manuscripts, about 3/4 are canonical Buddhist texts. But in addition, there are thousands of non-canonical texts, including the healing liturgies and books of everyday prayers that I want to focus on today. About 2,000 of these 60,000 contain one or more liturgies for a wide range of rituals, and within that 2,000 pieces, about 125 individual manuscripts contain one or more healing liturgies. So it's a significant, healing liturgies constitute a significant batch of all liturgies. And there are 2,000 out of 60,000 manuscripts from Dunhuang containing liturgies. So there's quite a number of them. What do they look like? So I'm going to run through three different formats, physical formats, ways of producing paper or books, written material, in which healing liturgies were produced. Liturgies are relatively short compositions. This is 2/3 of a healing liturgy on the front sheet of a paper. It was written for it's a prayer for the healing of a young woman. That's the front side of it, the recto side, and the prayer continues on the verso side and ends. So one sheet of paper was good enough to hold one liturgy. Other exemplars come in the form of a small booklet, or codex, as we call them in Dunhuang studies. This one measures 15 inches tall by 11 centimeters wide. It's about the size of a 5x8 index card. This form of the Chinese book, the codex, was particularly conducive to oral recitation because you only had to flip the pages. The booklets cover a wide range of rituals. In addition to rites of healing, they contain liturgies for memorial rites, graveside services, prayers celebrating the Buddhist birthday and Ghost Festival, inaugural blessings for newly dedicated statues, and fresh votive copies of sutras, as well as offerings for bountiful silk production and sacrifices to local deities. Hence, the healing liturgies provide us with unprecedented information about the ritual repertoire of local Buddhist monks. Now to the third format for the production of books, the scroll, which consists of individual sheets of paper pasted together and then rolled up in scroll form horizontally. Some compositions in this form, in the scroll form, were written hastily, probably surviving as rough drafts of prayers that a monk would embellish later when he produced a final copy. Other scrolls were manufactured more carefully and precisely, like the one you see here. The discoloration came in only during storage, after it was used and made and then put away or preserved. So originally this was a pretty manuscript without stains, and a lot of care was taken in its production. These exemplary prayer liturgies circulated widely in the medieval period, but where they survive to the present day is almost entirely only at Dunhuang. And were it not for Dunhuang and a few notes scattered here and there in the ethnographic notes, say, left by Japanese pilgrims, Buddhist monks coming from Japan to visit holy sites in China, who take back with them some of these manuscripts, or who write down what they see and how they see Buddhism being practiced in China. Were it not for this kind of surviving evidence, we would have very little idea of what was in the texts, or even what they were, how they were used. In recent essays, I've analyzed the codicological properties, the mise en text, the physical formats of the manuscripts, in order to hypothesize who used these texts and under what circumstances. Other work I've done explores the literary features of these compositions. Today I want to focus on something different. I want to focus not on their physical or stylistic features, but on their content. The healing liturgies are significant, I hope to show, because they shed light on the practice of religion and the culture of healing among a broad range of people during the medieval period. I'm going to argue that, properly understood, these manuscripts represent a model of ritual action that was both widespread and extremely important in Buddhism, in the religious universe of those who used our texts, hiring monks to chant, making a confession, or decorating a shrine. Patients or commissioners were thereby committing a deed, the consequences of which could be dedicated to healing illness. The Buddhist terms for this I put on this slide. The results of a morally good deed are called merit, or punya in Sanskrit, and the crucial portion of the ritual is the transference of that merit to the sick person. In Chinese, merit is usually termed hongda, or simply good fortune, and the transfer to the beneficiary is usually termed Weiqiang. None of this will strike my Buddhological colleagues as particularly surprising or unusual. And that, in fact, is my point. The mode of ritual based on the creation of good results and then the assignment of those results was probably the most widespread practice in the pre-modern Buddhist world. It relied on the most fundamental ideas of Buddhism, the doctrine of karma, according to which every deed has a result, and the notion of a division of religious labor between lay people and monastics. In the ideal Buddhist society, these two groups were connected by a flow of gifts which ensured the good health of the individual believer as well as the collective Buddhist body. And that good health was both conceived in physical, concrete terms as well as spiritual terms, both in this lifetime and in future lifetimes. Healing rituals are not the only kind of ritual utilizing these basic ideas about karma, but they are one of the most common forms of rituals. So they were common, practiced by almost everyone, founded on very basic Buddhist ideas. If that's true of the healing liturgies, why have they not come to light much before? Modern scholarship has had plenty of other important subjects to look at, and the Dunhuang documents have not been well known. Much has been made to date in very helpful and rich studies in both art history and Buddhist studies with the figure pictured in this painting by Shudra Guru Daja, or Medicine King. Social historians have shown that despite the prohibitions of monastic regulations and the strictures of secular law, both of which outlawed the practice of medicine by ordained Buddhist monks and nuns, nevertheless the practice of healing by monastics flourished in China and elsewhere during the late medieval period. The image that I used as an advertisement for my talk here gives some idea of just how widespread the practice of religious healing was in the medieval period. The painting is from Mogao Cave number 103, completed during the High Tang, roughly the first half of the 8th century, when the Tang Empire was twice the size that it was in the map that I showed. It shrank after about the year 750. The south wall of that cave illustrates portions of the Lotus Sutra, in this case the chapter one by Shudra Guru. Here we see an older sick person, bare-chested, in the center on the right, supported by his relatives, who are praying for a cure. Or a believer, or in some interpretations a preacher, kneels in front of him on the mat, reciting from a sutra, presumably the Lotus Sutra. The liturgical manuscripts I'm going to discuss today differ from other traditions of healings practiced in medieval China a little bit. Unlike the Lotus painting, the liturgies were not tied to any particular sutra, nor were they the preserve of any specific school or sect. They were trans-sectarian. Their commissioners, as often as not, were lay people, though monks and nuns could also be beneficiaries or commissioners. The rituals were performed not by lay people, but by monks. They were, in effect, the simpler, more numerous, less expensive, less involved versions of ritual traditions that have been explicated by our colleagues in tantric studies. As we'll see in a minute, the Dunhuang liturgies are based on the logic of karma rather than the tantric ritual model of identification of guest and host. Unlike the doctors and doctor monks who actually took pulses and dispensed recipes, the monks who copied and recited, put into practice the healing liturgies, could only be accused of practicing the transfer of merit, not the practice of medicine. So let's turn to the ideas of karma and merit enacted in healing liturgies. In recent articles in my forthcoming book in Chinese, I've followed a performative approach to the study of Dunhuang liturgical materials. performative analysis is particularly well suited to this material because it explains how good karma was created and then formally devoted to the curing of the patient. To make this clear, I'm going to present a short explication de texte of a representative healing liturgy now, drawing attention to the different steps of the ritual. I'll run through one whole liturgy and then go through the half of the second one. The first liturgy you have is contained on a handout. I can also put it on the screen, I think. So if you have the handout, we're looking, liturgy number 1 is on pages 1 and 2, and the second liturgy is on page 3. Let's start with 1. This particular text, I chose it for a reason. It's what I have elsewhere called the most popular healing liturgy at Dunhuang. It exists in 12 different copies in different formats, textual formats. The recensions are slightly different, and I've looked at them in other essays. In addition, it was produced during all 3 periods of important, different regimes at Dunhuang. It was produced during the time when the Chinese Empire was close, when Dunhuang was closely connected to the Chinese Empire. It was very tightly connected to the capital cities. It was produced during the period in which Dunhuang was ruled by the Tibetan Empire, an interregnum of 80 very important years that saw a multilingual, bilingual community and a Chinese, originally Chinese area became part of the Tibetan Empire. And then it was important again in the third important period of Dunhuang history when the Tang Empire fell apart and the Tibetan Empire was also on its more inward-looking time period between 850 and roughly the year 1000, when Dunhuang was in effect its own local culture for the whole area. So if you look at the first section on the liturgy, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but let me read a few passages and provide an interpretation. The first section of the liturgy there, titled Praising Buddha's Virtue, is a preface to the whole ritual. It sings the praises of the Buddha. It uses very abstract language drawn from both Buddhism and indigenous Chinese philosophical traditions. It sets a serious tone by using the lofty language of parallel prose, and it begins very abstractly. Section 1a, the substance of awakening hides and emerges, abolishing 100 errors with the marks of truth. The Dharma body is profound and clear, perfecting 10,000 virtues through proper purport. The next 2 sentences, section 1b, refer to physical features of the Buddha's body, his golden-colored skin and his Varnakesha. It reads, thus the golden hue envelops all, covering the suns and moons of the great thousand world. The jade wisp of hair casts its hues, brightening the Qian and Kun of 10 billion universes. After this praise section, the text brings the Buddha down to earth, as it were, narrating how he acts for the salvation of all suffering sentient beings. It refers to the way the Buddha succumbed to illness, and here I'm going to summarize that and read aloud C, D, E, and F. The Buddha suffered illness himself. He suffered a painful death and experienced death, just like all human beings, lying on his side between 2 solid trees in Kushinagara. It also makes the Buddha responsible for the teaching of the Nilakirti, the layman who famously displayed the signs of sickness as an expedient device. Up to this point in the liturgy, section 1, there's no direct reference to the ritual at hand, the task of curing. Other than the oblique references to the Buddhist abilities and Vimalakirti's illnesses, the words spoken could serve as a sermon introducing any Buddhist ritual. The second section of the liturgy, however, turns attention directly to the actors in the ritual and their reasons for performing it. Some liturgists, in fact, give it an explicit title to this section. I put it in square brackets, the purpose of the ritual, which I eat. This section is not about the Buddha. Instead, it identifies the sponsors of the rite, the beneficiary, and what the rite is supposed to achieve. It's written in a very completely different register of language, in very clunky classical Chinese prose. It reads, "And now the purpose of the donor seated in front chanting is to make a donation on behalf of such and such a person suffering from illness." These words, "such and such a person," Moran, is an expression frequently used in formularies. They could be read aloud on different occasions and for different individual sponsors. When conducting the ritual, the performer would just fill in the blanks, would fill in the words with the name or the position, more likely the social position of the sick person. So that's the intention, the announcement of the intention. The third section then turns to the patient. Sometimes this section offers both praise and blame. It first touts the patient's virtues, but then notes what evil deeds he or she might have committed to cause the illness. It reads in this section, "Ah, the sick one now his cold and heat lack timeliness, and his nourishment goes against the standard. His contagious sickness has flowed to his 5 emotions. His illness now envelops his 6 receptacles or bodily cavities. His strength is waning in movement and rest, and he fears the 2 rats gnawing away the vine. His mood is disturbed day and night, and he's afraid of the 4 snakes destroying the basket." Note here the vagueness of the diagnosis. Almost any illness would fit this description. It's concerned more with affect than with physical condition. The liturgy stresses the patient's anxiety and uncertainty. I think we would now call this mood disorders. The text invokes well-known parables, including one that compares the ills of human existence to a man in a well clutching onto a vine which rats are about to chew through. The fourth section, which I'm not going to read aloud, is sometimes called the ritual area or dalton, and it refers to the actions performed by sponsors and donors. The fifth section. In the logic of Buddhist ritual, the making of offerings constitutes a deed, and all deeds have consequences. The next and most crucial section of the ritual deals with the results. Remember that in Buddhist ritual, the consequences of action do not necessarily attach to the original actor. He or she can dedicate or offer those results to others, which is precisely what is accomplished in this section of the liturgy. In my analysis, this is the crux or hinge of the entire ritual. Without saying these words, without accomplishing this transfer, the good results will go unclaimed. It's like taking out an insurance policy and claiming the funds, but never going to actually receive the funds. It's sending benefits to someone, declaring someone as a beneficiary, but not actually putting that into practice. By the same token, since this is a relatively long liturgy, the shortest versions of the liturgy, what sections are included? Just this section, just section 5. So let's read it, it's very short. We take this merit and the fortunate causes from chanting and use them first to ornament the sick one himself. The word ornament is not without significance. Our colleagues in Indian studies know this word in Sanskrit guides, especially the fundamental concept of aesthetics and poetic composition, alankara. Its related words in Sanskrit are listed there on the slide. The Dutch philologist Jan Bonda, and as well as the Indian aesthete Ananda Kumaraswamy, spent a lot of time working through this concept already in the 1930s. Kumaraswamy suggested, quote Kumaraswamy, "It may be universally true that terms which now imply an ornamentation of persons or things for aesthetic reasons alone originally implied not merely aesthetic, external reasons, but rather their proper equipment in the sense of completion, without which satisfaction neither persons nor things could have been thought of as efficient. In the same manner, apart from his attributes, the deity could not be thought of as function." To return to our liturgies, the action of ornamenting a sick person is not simply a matter of altering the external appearance or the physical symptoms alone. Rather, it involves an ennobling and a change of character. Some rites speak even more plainly, substituting for the word ornamentation terms that indicate a transfer or carrying over. Other liturgies refer directly to the act of assisting the patient. The merit is mobilized to offer assistance to the patient or to provide help to the sick person. Let's continue with the prayer. The sixth section of the liturgy explains precisely how the merit that's been transferred is supposed to be enjoyed. The boons are passed in the form of a prayer, wish, or vow on the part of the sponsor. The prayer in our healing liturgy reads, as you can see, first part A, we pray that the 404 illnesses dissipate like clouds because of this offering, and that the 5 offerings, coverings, and 10 afflictions be extinguished on account of this. And then it continues that we pray that Medicine King and Medicine Superior confer spiritual recipes, that Sound Observer and Wondrous Sound bestow their wondrous medicine. It continues, we pray that sickness of the body and sickness of the mind on this day be cleansed away, calm when sleeping and calm when awake, his rising and resting be light and easy. And then finally, may all his enemies and creditors, anyone to whom he owes money or life, share a portion of his merit and cease being adversaries. Release the sickness, may they release the sickness, and return him to his former condition. In a few minutes, in the conclusion of my talk, I'm going to look at how our liturgies imagine healing to take place. Already it's clear that curing is a process, not a single event, that it depends on the intervention of deities, and that it requires the release of any debts and recriminations by one's enemies. After attending to the patient's health, our liturgy seeks its full quota of the proverbial 3 wishes. It makes a second ornamentation and then a third. Finally, the liturgy comes to an end with what I call a benediction, benedicere, good words, that are, in this case, are 4 syllables in Sanskritized Chinese. To conclude this analysis, the analysis of the structure of a transfer of merit healing liturgy, then, the basic idea of curing with karma undergirds every step. The words and deeds assure that karma is first generated and then distributed to a wide range of beneficiaries. So that's the model of curing with karma. Inserted within that model is sometimes a second submodel, and I call it curing with confession. And that's on the 3rd page. I'm just going to read a few pieces of it in order to emphasize the logic of confession, who takes part in it, what the underlying idea is, how does it work as a performance. As a performance, there is a confessor, an audience or auditor, typically by monks, and there are venerable figures, usually deities, who serve as authenticators for the confession. The deities who verify the confession are invoked at the very beginning of the ritual. They are invoked as follows. Humbly we invoke first Buddhas, then Bodhisattvas, then Shravakas, and then deities, unseen spirits, and all other kinds of spiritual beings. The text continues after the invocation in section 1b. Humbly we pray that they emerge from concentration atop blossom platforms and descend to this Dharma gathering, that on this day at this hour they authenticate what we state. The second section of the confession rite follows the earlier model we read, formally stating the purpose of the ritual, but at this time it refers to the assembled Sangha, the monks and nuns who serve as audience, and at the end it names the performer and the beneficiary. In this case, the ritual is being performed on behalf of a monk. Section 3 concerning the patient is similar to what we read before, so I'm not going to go into it at length. And then section 4 is very important. It's the confession which the sick person himself states, or else someone states it for him. It opens with a general introduction and admission of guilt, and then moves to specific transgressions. So it reads as follows, under section 4, ritual. The Vinaya master himself, that is the sick person himself, says, I was born and am living during the end of the Dharma. In appearance and name, I have left the householder's life, but my practice of the precept is always insufficient. So I often commit the sin of neglect or transgression. And now we get the list. It's not a long list. Walking through viharas and stupas and sitting and sleeping on the fields of gold, the valuables belonging to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha I have coveted to no end. Such sins as these are immeasurable and without limit. That's it. That's the whole list of sins right there. So he asks for, he confesses, he expresses contrition, he asks for forgiveness, and then he also does the same thing we saw in the earlier liturgy. He asks that his enemies or creditors share the merit thus produced. Confession was a central part of Chinese Buddhist liturgy. Spread throughout the Buddhist world, we see it clearly here in these popular Chinese Buddhist liturgies from Dunhuang. Perhaps it grew out of monastic confession, beginning monastic life, fortnightly confession of the Pratimoksha rules in India, and moving eastward, it was soon incorporated into lay practice as well as a variety of different. So this is the confession, this is the ritual procedure for a monk who is ill. Fortunately, I've also found one liturgy for nuns, and one liturgy for husbands, and one liturgy for government officials. And so for the nuns, of course, the list of sins provided by the monks who wrote these liturgies for their sisters, for the nuns, is the longest list. For government officials, the list is also pretty long. Are there any representatives or senators in the House, in the auditorium? I won't read them, but they're the usual kinds of things. Meting out punishment that's too heavy, arrogating public funds for private use, talking too long, and so forth. They all end the same way. They all lists a generic set of sins appropriate to one's social status. They all say, I'm sorry. They all express contrition. They all say, this is absolutely everything. I haven't concealed anything. They all say, I hope that the Buddhas will respond favorably to my contrition. And then they also emphasize the confessor's sincerity. So, what does all this say about the process of healing? As we've seen, the method of diagnosis is pretty consistent. The text described the patient's illness as a problem of disequilibrium. Her 4 great elements are out of kilter. She feels cold and hot intemperately. She's unable to rest. Healing by ritual is apparently undertaken, furthermore, only after secular medical treatment has failed. Many of the liturgies refer to, well, she's already tried acupuncture. She's already tried the feeling of pulse, which doctors were trained in. She's already tried medicine. Now she's going to try karma. Our liturgies are also consistent in attributing the cause of illness to the deeds of the patient in this lifetime or previously. But let's get back to the original question. How is one's medical condition affected by the commission of good deeds? In these rituals, merit-making is not simply a matter, as some modern Buddhists the world over might claim, of the individual. It's not simply a matter of the individual performing a simple action and then bearing the result. Rather, gods and other spiritual beings are actively involved in the process. It all takes place under the gaze of the Buddha, who's praised at the beginning. The Buddha, remembering, this is cited in many of these liturgies, the Buddha is the king of physicians. He's the best at pulling out poisoned arrows. Metaphors of illness and healing and medicine run throughout Buddhist mythology and Buddhist practice. Other deities are involved in the healing process as well. Foremost among them, as we've seen, are the paired bodhisattvas, Medicine King and Medicine Master, Vaisheshja Guru Raja and Vaisheshja Sambuddhagata. They are mentioned most frequently, but the Mahayana pantheon contained other medical specialists as well, a veritable network of healthcare providers. Many of them could be called on to minister to the sick, aside from the primary care bodhisattva, Vaisheshja Guru. The medical practice or the medical consortium also included Avalokiteshvara and Gangadaspara, the bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, and even dragons and other beings. They asked for curing, that would be Medicare, but they also asked for medicine, that would be Medicaid. Other liturgies seek a referral to a specialist, the Buddha's own physician, Jivaka. Not only are deities involved in curing one's illnesses, we've seen so too are one's enemies, perhaps unknown to me. I might have an enemy that I made in a previous lifetime, or I might have an enemy I know well now. As we've seen, the prayer sections in the healing liturgies earmark some of the merit produced by the patient for his adversaries or creditors. How do our liturgies imagine the subsequent process of healing to take place? As some prayers show, the words spoken during the course of the ritual shy away from clinical language or the description of specific symptoms. Instead, they turn to metaphors of anointment, infusion, fertilization, and climatological well-being. One liturgy asks, may the crown of his head be anointed with ghee, and the rain of the Dharma enrich his body. May 10,000 fortunes gather like clouds, and the 10,000 calamities roll away like fog. Other prayers suggest that illness will be carried away by a fragrant wind. So when you smell things again, when you have pleasant smells, that means that your illness is dissipating. Fever will be calmed by a cooling cloud. Congestion will clear like the bright moon. Impurity will be cleansed by the blazing light of the sun. Many liturgies conceive of health as a moist, sultry spa. Not only do our liturgies demonstrate the complexity of healing by drawing several agents into the process, they also show that other parties, in addition to the patient, receive the benefits. Rituals divide up the results of the sponsor's donation, essentially into a spiral, increasing in scope. It begins more narrowly with the patient herself or himself, but most liturgies move on from there and devote a second batch of fortune to the sponsor of the ritual, in his or her family, and then a third round of merit might be dispatched to deceased ancestors and to all sentient beings. So there's another strand of modern interpretation. The Vietnamese, the Franco-Vietnamese, the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh has called it interbeing. And I think it's fair to say that liturgies imagine a moral world of interconnectedness and of that aims to overcome divisions between people. That modernist strand of interpretation, I think, works for this set of material. Another strand of modernist interpretation is more psychological, and I see less of that in these liturgies. Personal responsibility, sincerity, those things are important, but they're not tied to a primary inner experience. Our texts do not counterpose practical benefits against ultimate concerns like enlightenment or salvation. They don't emphasize a distinction between immanence and transcendence. Many of the prayers in these liturgies connect good health with a curing of illness to other states of good fortune. So if you're well, then you'll have good fortune. You can understand that fortune as in monetary and material success. Good health is connected to a strong body and a calm disposition. Good health is connected to a long life. If you have good health, you will die happily in a good way. Euthanos rather than a bad death. You will achieve birth in a pure land in the presence of a Buddha after this lifetime, if you have good health now, if you're cured. You will have an afterlife of rest and ease, and finally, at the end of a very long process, you'll gain passage to enlightenment. All of these benefits are of the same quality. They're on a single continuum, not reducible to the individual's intention or the achievement of authenticity or wisdom. They're tied rather to the proper performance of a liturgy. These rituals are a reminder that the process of healing is just that. It's a process. It stretches out over many lifetimes. Buddhist cosmology and traditional understandings of rebirth are central to these liturgies. So, let me conclude. The process of healing in these liturgical manuscripts is pervaded by ideas of karmic causation, the making and transfer of merit, and Buddhist notions of donation. As we've seen, there are numerous participants in the cycle of exchange, including donors and patients, adversaries from other lifetimes, the Buddha, bodhisattvas, and other deities of healing, one's other family members or monastic brothers, and potentially all sentient beings. The whole system makes sense, or at least that is, I take it as a principle of hermeneutical generosity, that we ought to try first to understand how they all work together. That's the point, that's the reason for my using a performative analysis and looking at their language. Our liturgies don't voice modern suspicions about the impossibility of the gift. They don't draw our attention to gaps in the process. These texts don't engage with aporia of exchange. Nor is there any worry that only excessive gifts or perfect generosity, such as the generosity of the Sanghara or the generosity of the Buddha in his previous lifetimes, there's no suspicion there that only perfect generosity will work. Our liturgies are quite straightforward in saying the point is to establish a celebration of fortune on behalf of a person suffering illness. The communion thus established is large and complex. It involves different beings from different realms of the universe, but it is based consistently on notions of karma and merit. And with that, I close, and thank you very much. And also, hope we have at least time for a couple of questions.
entertain a few questions?
Yes, please.
In that time period from when the liturgies were lost, 1,000 years or so, were there various monasteries that carried on with the ritual, having known what they were?
Absolutely.
And did they ever go back and compare them to what they did? You know, say, oh, okay, well, here's the actual manual, and it's 1,000 years later.
So this is, I think of this as a continuing tradition, and we have a particularly rich slice of it that survives from one period, but they weren't invented in Western China. They were used all across the Buddhist world. These are Chinese versions of something that's widespread throughout Buddhism, offering a prayer when you make merit. That you find that everywhere in the pre-modern Buddhist world and much of the contemporary Buddhist world. However, these are not translated from Sanskrit. These are written in Chinese. So they were preceded by a couple centuries of development in China. They were all over China. We find wonderful copies of them elsewhere in the Sinosphere, because they were written in Chinese characters. They were carried to China and to Japan and Korea, where they were read in local pronunciation. And then, of course, they were not stagnant. Japanese developed these wonderfully, and they made a whole genre of the Walker genre. They discussed it, and talked a lot about it, and made it a much higher literary tradition in Japan, say. So in fact, we see it elsewhere. We can now use these to help write a longer history. So even though this particular batch and this particular linguistic style was partly lost, it's consistent with what we know, and we can put it together with what we know before and after and elsewhere.
Cool.
Yes?
Just how important was the geographic location of the ritual to these performances? Because there seem to be indications that medieval Buddhist sites were kind of transformed into Sufi shrines in Qinghai and Gansu and Xinjiang. So, but I've never seen anyone link it to healing performances. So I'm just kind of wondering if it had to be at a monastery or if it could be in a house.
The short answer is some of these were performed at monasteries, but most of them could be performed in the home. And I get this partly from what the liturgies themselves say. They don't say a lot. They'll say vague things like scatter flowers. The monks are all assembled. Does that mean that the monks are invited to people's homes? The liturgies don't say so. But fortunately, the Buddhist documents have many pieces that are invitations to funerals. And so I reason from there to these, and funerals are the most commonly performed in this ritual. So I reason from that ritual to this one. What are the invitations? A family invites either the most highly placed monk or a bunch of monks led by a ritual specialist to come to the home on such and such a day and perform a funeral ritual. So based on that, I think these liturgies fit that model. So it didn't have to be in a temple, and it certainly was not at the caves. The caves are gorgeous. Each of the caves is itself a temple, but it wasn't. There was not that much public ritual activity taking place at the 400 some odd caves at Dunhuang. There was some, but not much. There were other temples, and there were lay people's homes. Yes.
Actually, that was kind of related to what I was going to ask with how it was performed in terms of either personally or publicly, but then also, what was sort of, do we know of any like incentive, I guess, to get the monastics sent out to the home? Like, was there, oh, well, we'll come out, but you know, this would be a good donation, or do we know of any sort of?
Monks did this for donations. They went together. There was it's very clearly there, and again, it's there by logic that people are making a donation, and they are not asking, the monks get something in return for going to a layperson's home. One of my colleagues, a couple of my colleagues in China, whose work began in the 1950s under Marxist scholarship, they were very keen on They discovered it before anybody else. The Japanese, the French, the British have been reading these manuscripts for 50 years. But it took the Marxists to say, oh, how much were they paid? How much was the religious establishment making on this ritual? And they know the answers. Some of the Dunhuang documents have amounts they're paid. Some of the Dunhuang documents have the account books, not complete, but partial account books of monasteries. And they list things for rituals, for how much rituals cost. And some of the Japanese archives, medieval Japanese archives, provide similar amounts of material.
So what then would kind of limit how a household would be able to then fund this sort of?
Well, my favorite Dunhuang document, I did a little blog entry on the IDP website, the director of the International Dunhuang Project website, idp.bl.britishlibrary.uk. Asked 20 scholars in Dunhuang studies, what's your favorite Dunhuang document? So each of us wrote a little piece on it. You could make a very humble offer. And so I found one manuscript that has donations of 13 different nuns, either for illness or for funerary, for most of recovery from illness. And the donations are very humble. They're pieces of cloth, because this is one of the few possessions that a monk or nun would have, is your robe and materials used to make monastic robes. So you don't have cash. You didn't have to have cash. You had to have something done.
Two questions. First, were these chanted? And if so, were they more powerful if more people were chanting? So was there an effort to get a larger group to chant them?
So what do these sound like? You should ask some of the native speakers who have better Chinese than I do. If I can find this real quickly, I will. I put the slide in here. There are very different styles of language in this. There are very different styles of language in this text. I divided into seven parts. And the parallel parts sound beautiful, and they are at the same meter. They're called, it's the genre called parallel prose. It's not unique to Chinese, but don't translate stuff from other languages into this form. So they're very different linguistic registers in one whole liturgy, and they would sound very different simply by being recited. And so where does efficacy work come in? Efficacy comes in because the parts that sound beautiful are descriptive or praising. They describe the Buddha, or they narrate what the person did, or they praise. And then the non-euphonic, the parts that sounded cruder, and it's very easy to tell if you recite these out loud. The parts that sounded cruder were much more performative. They're the section that says, we now take all of these benefits and bundle them together and transfer them to so-and-so's memorial service. Like I just said that in English, and it's a clunky sentence. It's clunky in Chinese too, and it's not poetry. So there is these were pretty artfully crafted, and they were crafted in a way that you could hear a very clear shift in linguistic register. It's almost a different language.
And then the second question is, so today we don't chant the Guanyin Collected Sutras for somebody's sick or for somebody's birthday, for good wishes. But it seems like these were more tailored to individual people. When you started out, you talked about how these were, written for individuals. So have we lost that practice of really tailoring the chant for individuals, or is that somehow a different practice that we do today?
No, I think modern folks still perform ritual. In the modern Buddhist world, Remember that I'm a specialist in the medieval period, so I speak because I keep up with some of my students. Some of my best students work in, for instance, the Ming period of Chinese history or the modern period. To me, Professor Yu. The answer is yes, people do still perform rituals for individuals. And you can go to, so I was in Mount Lamé in Sichuan a year ago in December for a week, and they had a very long water land ceremony. And different sponsors sponsored each of the day of the water land ceremony. It went on for 7 days straight, morning and night. All the monks in the monastery were involved in chanting. And there was both a different sponsor and a different beneficiary for each 24-hour period. So some of that still goes on. Would there be compositions written for them? We should ask local informers. Yes?
I'm really glad you brought this up. What does each represent? Do the numbers indicate numbers of syllables?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Let me show you. If you read characters, so you can see the parallelism here. Well, here's the parallelism. Here's the first two lines I read. The substance of awakening hides and emerges, comma, abolishing 100 years with the marks of truth. Okay? The Dharma body is profound and clear, comma, perfecting 10,000 virtues through proper comportment. Parallel in terms of number of words, parallel in terms of grammatical structure, these all have the same, right? The tone alternates, and then the whole, so that's just 1A. And then the whole composite, this is my mathematical notation, it's a fake mathematical notation, but it lets me see how parallel it is. Because I eventually get to just a shorthand way to divide it. And then some are parallel, some are not parallel.
So each.
You want to go back to the characters?
Well, actually, the abstract schema.
Okay.
Each of, the last one. The last line. Each of the capital letters then represents a line.
Each of the capital letters represents a section, a stanza, a couplet. A couplet.
A couplet, so those are two lines representing.
That's right.
each capital letter.
That's right.
Okay.
So, again, it's just my way, a two-word introductory expression, and then two couplets of 4 + 4 characters each.
I see. Okay. And so you were looking at kind of grammatical patterns. Are there any patterns in terms of, maybe not, maybe this is mostly prosaic, but are there any patterns of, say, initial opening particles, rhyme, rhythm, that sort of thing?
Initial opening particles, there's only a certain number that are used, and so they repeat. And there is some connection between which particles you use for which section of the ritual.
Okay, so certain particles do
Yes.
mark sections of ritual.
Yes.
Does that appear in this scheme here? Can we see that in the way you're representing the text here?
I have to see, this only has one introductory particle, it's under A, it's qie. Under A, the first two characters, the first line of A, there are two characters, and then there are 4 + 6 and 4 + 6 after that. So this introductory particle, introductory expression, two characters, qie, it goes way back to pre-Han times, it goes way back, it's a composition you can use in rhyme prose in Chinese, in the Fu genre, and it's always used at the beginning. So this one is always used at the beginning. There are others like "you're sure" and "now" or "then," and then there are others, and I don't have any time. They're on the handout. You want to go to the handout? I maybe show you later. There are some that go for later sections. Almost always this introductory expression.
I'm just wondering if, given your interest in performative analysis, if the kind of syllabic and parallel structures, the word orderings, if that might give you a theory about how the original text was composed. I'm thinking of the work of Del Hymes and Dennis Tedlock on Native American texts, an ethnopoetic approach. And part of their argument is that the structure of the poetic or prosaic composition is in the structuring of the words and the relationships among lines. And so I'm just wondering if that might give you a sense of how the liturgies were developed originally. If people were thinking in terms of these structures, they may have been, it seems there's evidence, filling the structures with the words as a kind of liturgy generator, in a sense. But since this is a more written practice, maybe than oral, maybe it doesn't work.
Well, it's both. And that's one of the nice things. I mean, my colleagues in Chinese literature, they know this like in their bones. They know that when it's parallel prose, it sounds different, and they know what it sounds like. And they also know that it works in a modular way. That I have to have an expression that works this way, it sounds this way in this section, and I'm going to put it here. So I think the short answer is yes, I would love to do more with exactly that approach. I haven't done it yet, but I'd love to work on it.
One last question?
In prayers, are they invoking certain deities relative to the person's merits or their misdeeds?
I can't tell. I can't tell in this body material, but fortunately, no, I'm not alone. There are lots of people working on Buddhist medicine and Buddhist healing. There's a source book that will be out in another maybe a year or so, a really big fat source book from Columbia University Press on traditions of healing in Buddhism that will consist of primary sources and short introductions to the primary sources, edited by Pierce Salguero. Salguero just published a very important new book in the field of Chinese Buddhist medicine. And so there are many cultures, there's a very diverse culture in Chinese Buddhism, in Japanese Buddhism, I assume in Indian Buddhism. And it ranges from practitioners who are doctors to monks and people who function more as merit transferers. The Indian Buddhist medical texts were translated at a very high level. And there are also a lot of deities, so that's to get to your question. There is no shortage of deities that can be called upon. It sounds like more of a tantric thing to match the sickness to the deity. There's plenty of divination texts that match your dorani, your spell. What spell are you supposed to recite? That depends on the dream that you have, and it's a dream of a particular deity. So the deity is affiliated with the dorani, is affiliated with a particular person. But I haven't found that yet from you.
And I was wondering, in the language, are there more esoteric meanings to the text?
There's certainly many levels of meaning. There's lots of the language is heavily metaphorical, and especially the parallel sections are metaphorical. The non-parallel sections have hardly any metaphors in them. So I'm working in another lecture. I'm working on another paper I'm working on looks at the style of the language and how is it drawn from China? Is it drawn from India? Is it a local creation? How many levels of meaning are there? How complex is the metaphor? Is the metaphor that anybody would understand, like the wind of karma, or the seeds of karma, right? That's relatively easy to understand, where your deeds are a seed that you plant and you harvest the results later. Natural symbols. Compare that to very complex allusion, like the Buddha was at the twin trees. That's a very complex allusion. It refers to a specific historical event. And you have to know Buddhist mythology to know what it refers to. So there are many levels of complexity in this text. And some of the wording is pretty straightforward, and some of it Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if any was drawn from the Bong religion or from Pali.
So some of it was certainly drawn from indigenous Chinese religion. There must be, among the Dunhuang manuscripts, there are probably 15, of the 60,000, there are probably 15,000 in Tibetan. And there certainly is an interchange between local Tibetan practices and Tibetan Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism. So that's certainly going on here. I don't know the